We have worked really hard to get good information on what's going on with the Pac-12 and their TV deal, what's going on with the Big 12. We have really dug into it. We have, reached out to 30s and 40s of peoples and stuff. And we were able to find out yesterday that the Pac-12 has kind of hit a ceiling, a glass ceiling, if you will, where they're not able to crawl over the $300 million mark. And it is really turning into a situation where the Pac-12 is finding itself in straits that is questioning whether or not the Pac-12 is an actual commodity anymore.
This is a code 10 abort.
Because what we've heard is that ESPN really is the only one that is hard after the tier 1 rights. They are working with others to bring in other tiers. But at this point right now, between Fox and ESPN, they're looking at about a $300 million cap, which is $30 million per the 10 teams. But the issue is that's only average annual value, which means that not every team is going to get $30 million. And it really brings the question forward, hey, what are we looking at for a TV deal in the Pac-12? And here's what I've been told yesterday by sources in the TV industry, and that is that ESPN wants 2 late window games per week with the Pac-12. One of those is obviously going to be on TV and be their prime TV radio game, but the other one is going to be for ESPN, the app, their ESPN Plus and ESPN app. Mm-hmm. And then what you're looking at is the other tier 2 being probably Fox at this point, and Fox would get the prime early schedule game on that particular week for the Pac-12, who at that point would be the Pac-10 if nothing changes. And the real issue is that Fox doesn't have an appetite to be a tier 1 provider for the Pac-12. What Fox really has an appetite for is creating big games, early season big games, where you have a Big Ten SEC big time game. And we now know, obviously, who has those SEC TV rights. Well, ESPN does. So Fox and ESPN are in a situation where they could pretty easily team up on a Pac-12 deal and then create a series where you get 2 big games in the first week of the college football season, where you can have one of the best teams in the Big Ten and one of the best teams in the SEC. Imagine an Ohio State-Alabama game early season. Okay, well, maybe if you don't get that kind of game, hey, maybe you're getting 2 of the best teams in the SEC against 2 of the best teams in the Big Ten playing big games that are big revenue generators, that bring big sponsorship dollars, that bring big TV numbers, big viewer numbers, that make all parties involved big money. That seems to be what Fox's appetite is. And what's really scary if you're the Pac-10 right now or the Pac-12 is you're in a situation where you're arguing with people who have commonality. You're arguing and negotiating with people at ESPN and Fox who have every reason to work together to hold your AAV down, to hold that money down, because they have other products that they can do business on. And if ESPN and Fox are able to come together on a Pac-12 deal, they can leverage the Pac-12 for their millions of viewers per game, those late window games. They can leverage the Pac-12 for those and then go and do a deal together with the Big Ten and the SEC. And by the way, who's the real winner in all of this? It's the Big 12, because the Big 12 doesn't have to act right now on a TV deal. I think the Big 12, from what I understand, has been very patient and has been very quiet for one reason alone. They know the Pac-12 has 0 leverage. And the other thing that is very interesting in what we're hearing is that other schools, other institutions are unwilling to join the Pac-12 right now. That other major institutions that the Pac-12 is pursuing to remain a viable conference are not willing to have the conversation to join the Pac-12 because they know right now there's no money in that. $30 million, and let's just say across all institutions that every school is getting $30 million, which is not going to be the case, but let's just say that happens. Exactly which institutions are attracted to that? Not many. Certainly not the San Diego States of the world. Is a Blessed State attracted to $30 million a year? Yeah, they may be, but Jake, what this says to me is the Pac-12 is teetering on the verge of extinction.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what it is, and I think that the Pac-12 has thought way too highly of itself for too long, and you were complacent and didn't have streaming deals and didn't have income and didn't have revenue or whatever, and now you're paying the price for that. And I just think that you're too far behind these other conferences. There's a reason that ESPN prioritized SEC rights over you, ultimately. There's a reason that, ESPN is trying to push that AAV down as much as it can. I mean, there's a reason for that. And while, yes, the Pac-12 After Dark and serving that late window has a purpose, you're not going to get that $40-50 million a year number for your schools when you don't bring value. And so that's why I say this is, once again, not to be repetitive, this isn't rocket science. We know, hey, if you have big matchups and big games and big players in those games, that TV networks want your rights. They want to distribute your product. But when you don't have big name players and you don't have big games and you're on the West Coast behind the curve from a time perspective, TV networks are not going to give you $50 million a year. That's not going to happen. So that's why I say my concern has always been, well, what is Utah going to do? What is Oregon going to do? By extension, what is Washington going to do? Like these nameplate schools who are going to get $30 million a year. That's not good enough, man. These schools should be getting 50, 60 a year. So that's why I say we can, break balls on the Big 12 and say the Big 12 doesn't have value. But from a monetary perspective, I do think the Big 12 has more value than the Pac-12 does right now. And this threat of the Pac-12 like dissolving or just not existing anymore is a huge threat. I mean, again, if you're Utah and Oregon, you've got to find a new home. There's too much on the line. Like yesterday, I think it was on the show, we were talking about that BYU has all this stuff to play for, and there's, going to the Big 12 next year, and this is a super important year. Is this not a more important year for Utah than it's ever been?
I think there's no doubt about that.
Like, you have to perform. You have to be top 5 most of the year. You got to get back to the Rose Bowl. You got to win the Pac-12 while it's still around. Like, you got to do all these things. So that way, next offseason, after this season, next offseason, you can say, hey, 2 years in a row, we've won our conference. 2 years in a row, we went to the Rose Bowl. Hey, maybe we even won it this year. That has to happen for Utah and Oregon now that we know what this TV deal looks like or is going to look like.
By the way, the bots are back.
Oh, sick, dude, sick.
I was able to knock them out.
Well, good.
But I think there's a couple of things that we really have to talk about with this Pac-12 thing. If you're really maxed at $300 million, if that's the most that you're going to get from Fox and ESPN, and it certainly sounds like it is, I just don't think you're viable as a conference anymore. And one of the things that I was talking to people about on Twitter, it was amazing, the Twitter DMs last night. And all of the questions around this and reaching out to people I know in TV, the thing that is very clear that they have commonality on is that if the Pac-12 cannot add San Diego State, and if the Pac-12 does not have a footprint in California below Cal, they're not a viable conference.
Yeah.
And that's a huge problem because I was also told yesterday in no uncertain terms that UCLA is going to the Big Ten, that it would take a minor miracle at this point to keep UCLA from leaving the Pac-12 with USC.
Thanks.
Like there's just.
But like, if you're UCLA, why wouldn't you do that? This is my point precisely.
Well,
what's the incentive?
If you are, and this is the problem for the Pac-12 with ESPN and Fox, is that if ESPN and Fox are able to put together these big preseason games, if you will, these big kickoff classic type games between the SEC and the Big Ten, there simply is no way to match even a quarter of the value.
Yeah.
Because if those teams play in those games, and let's say that it's, like one of the best college football games I've ever been to is USC and Ohio State at the Coliseum.
Yeah.
During Pete Carroll's run at USC. Let's say you have a USC taking on an Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin versus USC and the hype around that, right? Like, if you play that game, and you play it in a neutral site, let's say, okay, you play that game in Chicago, let's say, or you play that game at a neutral site. The idea that USC fans don't travel is crazy. They travel really well. The idea that Ole Miss fans, The idea that a top tier team, if you're getting a Georgia versus Michigan, if you're getting those caliber of games for a kickoff classic in a major NFL stadium, man, it's going to be tough not to pay those teams millions of dollars to show up.
So when you're UCLA and you're not a good football program, right? Like you're not, and you can make that extra money, why would you not do that?
And you're going to build infrastructure to try and become more competitive. And by the way, I also think basketball is a huge component of this, because not only can the Big Ten and ESPN make a deal, but you can still do the Big Ten ACC type games. You can still do big basketball invitationals. Because, by the way, one of the major chips that nobody's talking about is Arizona basketball. Arizona basketball would be a huge ad for the Big 12, which would already then be even stronger in position to be the best basketball conference in the country.
Yeah.
And then what happens? Now, all of a sudden, you're making more money, and you're getting Kansas versus Arizona, and you're getting those schools traveling to other tournaments. The Maui Invitational now becomes more attractive, more viewers, more money, more sponsors.
Yeah.
And all of this is happening because ESPN and Fox are doing business together. Oh, by the way, what happens with NBC? Where is NBC going to spend its money on college football? Because there is no doubt that NBC right now has an appetite, and now that they have the USA networks of the world, that we're not talking about NBC Sports Network anymore. The game has completely changed with NBC coming to the table, offering to be a second tier, offering to be a third tier, injecting more money into these deals. You're now in a situation where you can really leverage conferences, because you're going to make them more money. You're going to put their athletes in a higher position, which allows them to recruit more, which allows them to win more games and make more money and recruit more and win more games and sign more sponsorships.
Yes.
And the ball starts rolling.
But this is why the arrogance of the Pac-12 at their media day was so incredible.
Incredible.
I mean, just sitting there saying that somehow you're really valuable and we're going to be fine, and the Big 12 is just trying to tear us down. No, I got news for you, bro. The Big 12 has nothing to do with it, right? This whole teardown process and the Pac-12 disappearing has been going on for a decade. Like, if you've been paying attention, you've been watching the slow but steady downward progress of that conference. And it's frustrating, because if you think about it, like we were having this conversation earlier in the show, about how like New York and LA are basically equals, essentially, as far as business. The problem is in the Pac-12, they're not equals, right? Because LA should have been a much bigger thing for you, and it's not, because you didn't leverage it. Yet in the ACC, you've got, Syracuse, who is not really a big program, did some basketballing, but they're in New York. So they're big. They know how to leverage it. Them. That's my biggest thing. So if I'm Utah and Oregon, you got to be cold-blooded about it. It can't be, oh, well, this is the Pac-12, and we've been here forever, so we need to stay. No, screw that. Like, SC's out, UCLA is out. Now we got to go and find our new home. And I just think the Pac-12 and the arrogance has to come to an end.
Yeah, and I think Utah has to get to the Big 12, because I think the next big conference is going to be the Big 12 in some form or fashion. I mean, I think Utah is, and I know everybody talks about Oregon, but I think Utah is one of the absolute prizes in the Pac-12 currently. And I think when you start looking at how the landscape of college football is going to change, and we've been talking about this, frankly, since 2014.
Yeah.
When we talked about Texas and USC trying to, form a relationship and trying to form a conference on their own. And you have seen Texas trying to get out of the Big 12 and USC trying to get out of the Pac-12 for years and years. And I think what's very interesting is it was only a matter of time. And when you look at how the USC UCLA exit, the escape, the evacuation from the Pac-12 happened, they absolutely snaked the Pac-12 and the rest of that membership. They told nobody. They did not ask permission. They did not ask your opinion, because, frankly, they don't care. Yeah. USC and UCLA went and did what was best for them, and I hope that Utah is doing that.
Y'all
because
feel me?
I think you have to do what's best for you. I think you have to do that. Let's see. K. Nurin says Big 12 takes the best of the rest of the pack. Utah doesn't make the cut. Stop.
Get the hell out of here
Stop.
with that.
Come on.
Just stop, dude.
Listen, I understand K's a BYU fan. I totally understand that. Utah is, in my opinion, arguably the best football property in the Pac-12 remaining. So take out USC, because USC, I again will say, I think USC right now today is the most talented program in that conference.
And by the way, for BYU fan, this needs to be said. Again, the next time BYU and Utah plays, it will be much closer. It will be very, very competitive.
It always will be, I think.
But I think what BYU fan likes to do right now, and I get it. I'm not vilifying you for it, but I think what you like to do right now is you like to say, "Oh, well, Utah's nothing. We beat Utah, and they're nothing."
No, I think what BYU fan is doing is paying retribution for the last decade of curb stomping that Utah fan has done to BYU. I think that's what this is,
and I don't blame them.
And I don't blame them either. But I think it's not lost on BYU fans that Utah fans were assholes. The things that were said and the things that were done are what make this rivalry special. But BYU fan, be better than this. If you cannot at least respect what Utah has done, Utah's coming off of arguably the greatest season in the modern era of football in the state of Utah.
Yeah.
What they accomplished through tragedy and adversity to win the conference and come within a breath of winning the Rose Bowl over Ohio State is nothing short of spectacular. Utah is a fine institution. It is a great football program. And for their sake, I really hope that Utah ends up, well, hell, for everybody's sake.
Yeah.
I hope that Utah ends up in the Big 12 because we need BYU and Utah.
The holy war.
And I think if Utah ends up in the Big 12, Utah has access to the college football playoff that I think currently would be very difficult to access in the Pac-12.
Yeah, and I hope that NIL picks up for Utah, eventually when they do move. I'd like to see that.
Yeah, yeah, come on. It has to. Yeah. Has to. Kurt Meyer says Utah has to make the cut. Has to.
Yeah.
Eric and Raleigh says, I think K. Nurin is Mrs. Monty trying to stoke the fires.
Oh, okay.
New York Jazz fan says Utah would be a huge ad for the Big 12. Massive.
Yeah.
Massive. Let's see. Ryan Thomas says, look, I don't like Utah, but I can make a legitimate argument why not to include them. It is a solid program. I can't make a legitimate argument why not to include them. It's a solid program that makes the conference better, exponentially better. I agree with that 100%. New York Jazz fan says Utah's the best team in the Pac-12. I would agree. Well, we'll find out against USC. That's a massive game. And by the way, you got to beat Florida. And I think Utah's better than Florida.
Yeah.
But Eric and Raleigh says Utah and BYU together in the Big 12 would be massive, huge.
It'd be awesome.
Huge. Ruff's official says when Oklahoma and Texas leave, the best team in the Big 12 would be Baylor and Houston. Okay.
I think Utah'd have something to say about that.
I think BYU will have something to say about that. Ryan Thomas, 100%. New York Jazz fan says. Ryan Thomas says Utah, Washington, Oregon bring great matchups to the Big 12 schools that add value. And I think you got to have Arizona and Arizona State. Because I think Arizona brings basketball, and I don't think Arizona and Arizona State will split.
Arizona
yes.
basketball is a legacy program. They haven't done anything in the last, how long?
I mean, they haven't won a national championship. They have
but they struggled to make the tournament.
Well, I also think they've had a lot of issues under Sean Miller. I think that they are out of mop heads to because they had to clean up sweaty Sean's sweat dripping all over the floor and Tucson.
So that's how it's going to be.
Anyway, the point is, Arizona basketball is a get. There's no doubt about that. No doubt about that. Casey Finlinson says, what about Amazon, Apple, and when are they getting involved? I don't know. I think ESPN is where everybody wants to be. I think the ESPN app, ESPN Plus, the streaming. I mean, it's remarkable to me that ESPN was so far behind the streaming curve, and now they own it with Disney Plus and ESPN Plus. I mean, it's just absolute domination.
Yep, it's execution.
It's absolute domination. K. Nurin says San Diego over Utah to the Big 12. Stop.
Now you're just trolling.
Come on. Scammer Trolling says Jake is a freaking genius, man. Pac-12 should hire him. Okay, Eric and Raleigh says Amazon and Apple not being involved in a bid for the Pac-0 TV rights is very telling. about the value. I think the value is the real question.
I just think the value is clean cut. Like you have, so there was this whole thing about how the Pac-12 is looking to private investment because the conference itself is worth like $1 billion or whatever it is, and that's going to be their lifeline. And all I'm here to say is that's great if you get private investment, but that doesn't help you be more relevant. That doesn't help you. Like, yeah, sure, if you get the money, like how far does several $100 million go, outside of TV rights? Like TV rights are one thing, but I'm talking about just a cold cut influx of like $500 million. Does that help you build the TV network? Does that help you do anything? What do you do with that? Because again, this whole piece of Pac-12 arrogance, it makes it so that you don't know what they're going to do. Like, to me, it's obvious. Hey, if you got all that money, yeah, you need to do a distribution deal. You need to, like, build something.
And I think the biggest issue is that Fox and ESPN working together have leverage.
Yeah.
I mean, they can put together the biggest games in college football. They simply can. I mean, let's not forget that Fox owns 61% of the Big Ten network. I mean, ESPN has TV networks and deals with all of these conferences.
You're talking about being able to put together out-of-conference games, like preseason games essentially, that are like bowl game matchups. That's what you're talking about. You're talking about the best of the best playing in the first 3 weeks.
And I think you're going to see that they're going to want to do that in one weekend. They're going to want to have 4 to 6 massive matchups.
Yeah.
Across all of those networks. And I think you're going to be able to stream that. I think Fox is making, from what I understand, Fox is making massive infrastructure upgrades in their streaming providing, their stream the way that they deliver you stream.
Yeah.
God damn it. Like the Fox Sports app is growing exponentially. Like I think Fox and ESPN are in a very good position, and I think the Pac-10 is screwed.
Yeah.
I think they are because if you can't get San Diego State, and I'm not saying San Diego State has declined or whatever, I'm just saying from what I was told yesterday, the Pac-12 has struggled to add teams to get people to agree. And I think the Big 12 has done a very nice job now that we know of just kind of sitting and waiting and watching the Pac-12 implode on itself. Because that's what's happening. $30 million a year on average.
It's embarrassing.
Not per school, on average. $30 million on average is not even a starting point for Oregon.
Yeah.
Oregon doesn't. And by the way, if you're like, well, Oregon gets more revenue. Okay, well then what are you going to say? What are you going to say to Washington? Because there's only one top dog in a conference. What are you going to say to the Arizona schools? What are you going to say to Utah? How do you justify paying Washington and Oregon more money than Utah?
Yeah, Washington's a conundrum. They haven't been good in a minute. I mean, I understand they're a value proposition.
And they've had scandals, and they've had coaching turnover.
But this is what I mean. Like, not to pick a fight over the Arizona schools, but yes, I get that Arizona basketball is a thing. Like, I get it, but at the same time, what is the actual value right now? It would be different if Arizona had just gone to the Final Four or just made some serious noise in basketball. Their football program is nothing until they start contending at the top of the conference. Literally, it's nothing.
But I also think one of the things that ESPN and Fox are going to control is access to the college football playoff.
Yes.
I think that the offshoot of these big games that I think ESPN and Fox would like to do in the preseason is that those are big wins for somebody. But the losses aren't the end of the world. Because if Ohio State loses to Alabama to open their season in the Kickoff Classic.
But then you go and win 10 or 11 in a row.
And you still got that payday. That's called controlling access.
Yeah. Because
your strength of schedule goes up. Look at Utah's strength of schedule right now. Utah's strength of schedule, because of the conference affiliation, is over, I think it's 107 or something.
I believe it's
stupid
107,
like that.
Yeah.
As an independent, BYU has more strength of schedule than a Pac-12 conference-affiliated team.
BYU's at number 13.
How is that possible?
Utah's at 107.
Because the conference lacks. That's the problem. So when we're talking about these TV deals, I'm telling you, Fox and ESPN are going to have more control over your ability to play for a college football national championship than the Pac-12.
You know,
they're not. It's as simple as, are you making us money or not?
Yeah. And
if you're not making us money, you're the Mountain West. You're the AAC, right? Like, how long is look at Miami? What Miami's doing with Mario Cristobal?
Yeah.
What if Miami's very good? And what if Clemson says, you know what? Yeah, I don't know about this ACC thing. What if Clemson and Miami, what if Florida State and Miami want to say, well, you know what? I think I'd rather be in the SEC. I think I'd rather be in the SEC.
Mm-hmm.
Then what? By the way, what if Notre Dame joins the Big Ten? Then what? Like, you have to move. You have to move. Do you really think the Big 12 is just going to sit here and watch this go down? I don't think so. I really don't think so. I think you are watching the end times of the Pac-12. As a conference, I think you're watching the final days of its existence.
Yeah.
All right, let's get some of your comments in here because I do want to get to Deshaun Watson today. Greg Hawkins says, blame Larry Scott. No, you know who I blame? I blame Pete Carroll in USC. USC is one of the singular reasons that this conference has taken a dump because you have been terrible for a decade. You've been terrible for a decade. You've won nothing. You've not competed at a very high level on a regular basis. You have been crap at USC. And now you're just going to turn and run? You're going to turn and run for a payday. USC's the reason this conference is struggling. USC's the reason that the Pac-12 is going to be...
One of the reasons.
Larry Scott, TV deals, streaming. Okay, absolutely. If USC was 3 national championships in the last decade, we're not having this conversation. We're not. Because this conference would be stronger. This conference would have a better TV deal. If frankly, if we're being really honest, if Phil Knight's money in Oregon had amounted to anything, we're not having this conversation. The Pac-12 did it to themselves.
But Oregon was good for a minute. I mean, you had...
Alabama was elite for that entire window.
Well...
Georgia has become elite. Look at Ohio State.
I don't know, man.
Even Michigan is competing.
I don't think you're wrong. USC certainly is not helping, but USC isn't the sole reason. I think that from a branding perspective, streaming, like distribution perspective, USC has not been good in a while.
I'll go as far as to say the business of football in the Pac-12 is why this conference is in trouble. If you look at Arizona State and what's going on with Herm at Arizona State, you look at Oregon, you look at, how did you lose Mario Cristobal? Like that. Now I understand he went home and it's Miami. I totally understand that.
Yeah.
But you just walked away? You just left it there like a steaming turd? Like, how is Washington not recovered after Chris Peterson left?
Final.
Explain to me how on earth is UCLA just not competitive? Because you've done it to yourself. We're elite. Our institutions of higher learning. We're research institutions. We're really cool people.
Don't lie to me.
Stanford, they get 13 people at a football game.
Yeah, and their AD is going to sit on the board at Media Day.
Hey, by the way, didn't you guys have that scandal in the Pac-12 where Hollywood parents were paying their kids way into schools that they didn't belong to? Yeah, you did. You did this to yourself.
Doesn't make you feel responsible.
You did this to yourself. There's no other way to look at this. You're terrible as a conference. Larry Scott had to have that office building in downtown San Francisco, and I got to stay on a private jet and stay at the top floor of the greatest hotels in the world.
Are we clear on that?
No, you don't. Anyway. No, I won't. No. All right. Ryan Thomas says ACC would be an elite conference without BC, Syracuse, and Wake Forest. And my mom would be my dad if she had bowls, but she doesn't. I don't know what one has to do with the other. Kay Nuren says, would love to play Notre Dame every year. BYU versus Notre Dame, best game of the year. No. Kay, why are you so railing on anti-Utah rhetoric
Yeah, what's
today?
your deal, bro?
What are we doing? Let's see. Rand says Gator Utes game will be interesting. Utah's winning that game.
We'll
I'm
give you
telling
more on that as we get closer.
Yeah, we'll preview that as they get closer.